again. It's wonderful to see you here today for our Saturday live session. We have Acharya Rudranii with us today, which is really special. It's always wonderful to have her here. And she's going to be talking about systolic movement on the way to the Supreme. And I'm going to let her introduce herself and also start her presentation. So thank you again, Rudranii, for being here. Like I said, it's very special. You're a special presenter for us here at PLT, so we appreciate it.
Namaskar, and I'm very happy to be here and see all the smiling faces. Okay, that's a cue to smile if you're not smiling right now. Actually, smiling itself changes all the chemistry in your body. So even if you don't feel like it, it helps. It helps you to do it. We're going to be talking a little bit about how the brain functions today. So that's why I mentioned that. I live in near Asheville, North Carolina, on a master unit where there are other people who also practice meditation. And we have many projects here also. I would like to invite anybody there to come visit. We have a preschool, we have a wellness center, a retreat center, a Proud Institute, and some families living here too. Lotus House, a house for ladies. And so it's beautiful. It's in the mountains. And I feel fortunate to be here. My husband and I moved here about a year ago. And I have been practicing meditation since 1971, many years. However, my presentation is called the Systaltic Movement on the Way to the Supreme. And even though I can say over 50 years, if I had to add, if I really added up how many times I had consistently done my meditation and my practices, I couldn't say 50 more years, because it's a movement of waves. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. So we can start the presentation. Systaltic movement on the path to the Supreme. Systaltic means, let's go to one more slide. The next one. Systaltic means moving in a pulsative way, which is also a wavelength. You should know that the nature of the world is such that nowhere is there permanence or freedom from struggle. Now, this sentence is a positive sentence, because if we know that's the nature of the world, we can relax and enjoy it. That means everything is made of waves. We know that. We've read that. We study science today a lot more than in the past. And so we know that everything is a world of waves around us. So what does wave mean? It means that it's not permanent. Something that's permanent is a straight line, an absolute. So since that is the nature of this world, we have to expect change. And then freedom from struggle means the effort. Struggle here is a positive struggle. It's the effort to go deeper into ourselves, to know ourselves better, and to struggle against lethargy in action. Go to the next slide, please. So here is an example of our daily life. Things happen. to us. And you can see how these events affect our mind. The waves in our mind are affected by external events that happen in our lives. So you see, had a baby, someone said your work isn't good, your mind goes down, landed a big client, your mind goes up, lost a client, date night, some enjoyment. So these are the events, example of a normal life. And our mind, just like people who do stock market every day, you know, their mind goes up, mind goes down. So how do we stay centered in the midst of external events? You can go to the next slide, please. This one is, let's skip this one. It's not so clear. All right. In order to move through this life in a way that our mind stays strong and centered, we have to understand ourselves and understand our body and our mind and how it functions. So that knowledge enables us to overcome distractions and to overcome the ups and downs. And also, this is part of our evolution. We are evolving. We are still evolving. We are changing. So we are discovering more about how this mind and body functions every day. And science backs up now, today, backs up all the practices we do to expand our mind. So, an understanding that we're in a sea of waves, these are actually vayus. In yoga, there are vital energies functioning in the body that also flow in a series of waves. These vayus affect our mental processes, our thinking, and also the rhythm of our body, our glandular system. So here are some of the internal vayus. There are internal 5 and external. So prana vayu at the top, it controls the respiration and thought processes. You will notice when your breath is rapid, you cannot concentrate. The more you concentrate, your breath becomes regular and slow. When you meditate, just concentrating on your meditation practice, you may notice that your spine becomes more erect. It happens unconsciously. It becomes more erect, and your breathing starts to become slower and more regular. That's because the mind is beginning to concentrate more and more. If you're sitting in a room and you're studying and you're so deep in study, you don't notice if someone enters the room, you will notice that your breathing is deeper and deeper and more regular. So breathing controls the rhythm of our mind. If we are anxious, if we are nervous, the first thing to do is breathe deeply down into your lower abdomen. I have a student in one meditation class now who has had 8 years ago, she was diagnosed with one node of cancer on her pancreas. And for 8 years, but it is not active. Right now, it's in remission. So every year she has to go and get it checked. And she started feeling more and more nervous every time she would go to get her pancreas checked. to the point where she was actually holding her breath in the waiting room. And she learned that by breathing deeply and rhythmically, that her anxiety reduced more and more. So she learned a technique that helped to control her mind and her body. So prana is controlling respiration, and that's why it says at the top of that screen, controls respiration and thought process. So that whole rhythm from our heart center and our lungs, the way we breathe. And when the lungs breathe, they're not just breathing forwardly, they're breathing all around in a circle in our back, our sides, our front. So that whole area of the body expands. And also the asanas we do, like cobra. Cobra opens up that whole chest area and the heart center. And it also allows your breathing to become more regular, more expanded. If you're learning meditation, which I think all of you are, there are many lessons in meditation, not just one lesson. And in some of the lessons that you will learn in the future or have learned, you know that you do control of your breath. And that also helps your mind slow down. If you have trouble in the beginning of meditation to concentrate, listening to kirtan is wonderful. And another thing is to slow down your breathing first. Check your breathing. If you just ran into the room and sat down, you will be out of breath. So you need to have a transition from being outward to going inward. And breathing is one way to do that. Music and kirtan is another way. So all of those techniques are helping you go deeper in your meditation. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, this is also an overview of the vayus, the vital energies in the body. The ones on the left, inner vayus, we just looked at them briefly. And the outer ones have to do with the external movements of our body. Naga means it means serpent, actually, and it means stretching and moving the body outward. I'm not going to go into depth in each of these. The last one, Dhananjaya, means sleep and drowsiness. Devadatta has to do with hunger and thirst, and so on. Go to the next slide, please. Now, backing up all the practices that we are doing today, there is a whole new science. And this particular person, I've heard him speak. He's come to Asheville, Andrew Newberg. He has created neurotheology, which is the study of mostly meditation. He's also investigated prayer and chanting. And he's done thousands of brain scans on people who are deep in meditation. And he's seen the effect on our brain and on our nervous system. So he has called this neurotheology. He's the founder of neurotheology. He works at the University of Pennsylvania. He has a whole department that has studied meditation. He's written several books. One of them was How Enlightenment Changes Our Brain, How God Changes Our Brain. And he's fascinating because it just reinforces how important it is in terms of our growing evolution to use our brain. Our brains are created to meditate. That's what it shows. It shows our brains are created to evolve through the process of meditation. And the study of the relationship between the brain and spiritual or religious phenomena and the changes that have come about. The next slide, please. This book came out about 8 or 9 years ago, How God Changes Your Brain. So some of the information I'm going to tell you about in short form is coming from that book. Next slide, please. Okay, this is an example of a graph that shows, not like the previous one that was very up and down. It shows more of like a straight line, and it shows progress toward a goal. Next slide, please. So when we meditate, we would like our mind to be moving more in a straight line. But here, of course, is another example of how a great impact on one's life could affect the balance of the mind. We have someone here who just went through a great experience, a natural disaster. And you see, not everyone's mind will go down to the bottom, like that one line you see there. Through meditation, through the resilience that we've created in facing obstacles in life, the mind doesn't have to drop to that level. And I'm sure the way she has gone through it is by keeping her mind positive. In order to have a healthy brain, optimism is essential. Optimism makes our brain function in a healthy way. Next slide, please. Okay, so here are some of the everyday obstacles that our brain faces, our thoughts, the thoughts that are in our brain. And maybe people have heard of these. They're called ANT, automatic negative thoughts. And you can see what some of them might be. And today we can read everywhere about thoughts and how it affects our mind. There's been so much research on that. I'm sure everybody is aware that your thinking, which your mind always does, your mind never, ever, from the time you were born, has stopped thinking. It's impossible to think of nothing. It's the mind would be destroyed if it didn't hold a thought in it. And all the thoughts you've thought so far have brought you to where you are today. So what if you have these circular thoughts going around in your mind? Then you just let them go. You don't fight with them. You replace them with positive, with your mantra, with your ideation. There are many, many ways to stop these thoughts. And some of you have learned them for many years. So you understand. Next slide, please. So here are some of the sentences that have come from the book I mentioned, How God Changes Your Brain. Your thoughts clearly affect the neurological functioning of your body. So every time you have a thought, a whole chemical release goes through the body because of that thought. Optimism is essential for maintaining a healthy brain. Positive thoughts neurologically suppress negative thoughts. So not only when you sit in meditation, but when you are working during the day, sometimes, around all of us, there are people that we may consider annoying sometimes. And how those people affect our mind. We also, through our ideation, through our meditation, we are trying to see the good in everything. It's a practice, not only when you meditate, but when you go about your day-to-day activities. It's a practice to keep the mind optimistic. So we are never at a point where we just relax and let our mind do what it wants. We're never allowed to do that. Once you start this process and you understand how your thoughts affect you and everyone around you, you can never sit back and say, okay, I'm going to take a rest now. I'm going to stop. You can't do it. It's impossible. Positive thoughts neurologically suppress negative thoughts. When you change the way you think, you begin to change your outward circumstances. Consciousness, reality, your mind, and your spiritual beliefs are profoundly interconnected and inseparable from the functioning of your brain. How you think, how you act, it's all connected. Next slide, please. Now, there's a very important part of our brain called the anterior cingulate cortex. Our brain is made up of three brains. The reptilian brain, which is at the base of the neck. The mammalian brain and the prefrontal cortex. Again, we are evolving. We have evolved from 300 million years ago to 100. Okay, 300 million years ago, we had reptilian brain, and we have all gone through this. And it's still there. And then mammalian brain. So the characteristics of these other brains come out into our everyday lives. Now, the reptilian brain is the crudest brain, but it also has evolved somewhat. It's not like we're acting like dinosaurs 100%. But the mammalian brain, which is newer, that is affecting us very much still. Through meditation, we are trying to overcome some of the characteristics, which is groupism, strong emotions that are out of our control, how we identify ourselves, and irrational emotions. That's our amygdala. And then in the very front of the brain, you see the newest evolutionary part of our brain, which is developing more and more through meditation practice. That part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, when you meditate, they've had studies that show that the left prefrontal cortex grows more. There's more activity in it. It's associated with feelings of joy, with feelings of wanting to share that joy. So meditation increases gray matter in that area. You see how meditation is helping us evolve. Between the part of the brain, the amygdala, which is that kind of shape, like a shoehorn shape that's cream colored, and it's right next to the blue anterior cingulate cortex, which on the other side is the prefrontal cortex. That small area of the brain is like a seesaw. It regulates emotions and reasoning. So what happens is, if you are feeling out of control emotionally, which creates a whole systematic change, your adrenaline glands start to secrete more and more adrenaline. You have fear, you have anxiety. It courses through your body and makes you want to defend yourself against a threat. So you see, when that part of our brain is stimulated, overly stimulated, we become anxious and fearful because of the chemicals coursing through our system. But this small anterior cingulate, very delicate part of the brain, it immediately tries to balance that out by putting more energy, more blood goes into the prefrontal cortex, which is logic and reason. It slows down and it takes away the fear and anxiety. It also has been shown, as I mentioned, to make people more social, more compassionate, more understanding. So actually, it's a fight in our brain between our less evolved self and our more evolved self. As we meditate, the ectoplasmic structure in our brain changes. We're actually changing the physical structure of our brain just by meditation, just by those thoughts, those very high spiritual thoughts. And there's also, okay, next slide. There's a doctor named Daniel Amen, and he's a controversial doctor because he did some very good things, but he kind of got sidetracked into profit motivation instead of research. So for that reason, he is controversial, but he did something very good. He has done 83,000 brain scans in many countries, and he has actually been able to diagnose through this system traumatic brain injuries. Sometimes we look at people and we wonder why they cannot control themselves. But since we understand how the brain works more and more recently, traumatic brain injuries alter people's personalities, and they may not even know they have it. So in terms of judging people about whether they are more evolved or more in control, we also have to be humble in the face of actual brain injury, which may be undiagnosed. When we see people acting in ways that we can't understand, that also may be a cause. And I grew up, and I'm sure all of you, even though I'm older than all of you, I'll be 80 in March, which is getting on. But thanks to spiritual practice, thanks to my teachers, my body is healthy. So we have to consider that people we may look down on, or we may think, why can't they be this way or that way, that there may be actual brain injury. So in that sense, we still have a lot to learn about how to take care and be compassionate toward our fellow humans. Okay, next slide, please. There's another interesting thing about how our brain works, because if we become too logical and too reasonable, and we shut off our emotions entirely, we don't have the compassionate understanding of others if we do that. So because your brain is only capable of consciously holding a handful of concepts, approximately 4 to 7 chunks of information in its working memory, and you only hold them for 20 to 30 seconds. If you engage in an intellectual dialogue that is longer than 30 seconds, your frontal lobe may begin to disconnect from the emotional centers in your brain. So again, we want the emotional and compassionate part of our brain to be functioning with our logical and reasoning brain, in order to have empathy for others. Even though our brain is evolving toward the reasoning and rational part and beyond, because definitely we are creating an intuitional brain. We want to use the amygdala. We want to use the emotional part to expand our compassion, to feel that we want to do something for suffering humanity. So it's important to always understand that every part of our brain is important to use in our spiritual development. Next slide, please. So this is what's happening today. We're learning all these amazing things about this physical mind and body. And we're learning that we are given one of the most wonderful practices to do in order to create a more universal society. There also has been research on how our brain divides and creates walls. This same doctor, Dr. Newbert, some other things he showed through his research. And doing this research means people see how much blood flow goes to different parts of the brain that stimulates those parts of the brain. So the idea of groupism, for example, he did an experiment where he put people into different corners of a room. And these people didn't know each other. And they were grouped. They weren't grouped according to any norm. They weren't grouped according to race or intelligence or nationality. They were just randomly put into two groups in a room. And automatically, the people identified with the group they were sitting in without even knowing each other. They looked more suspiciously at the group across the room. So this tendency, which is really from our amygdala, it came from the time we were mammals and we created herd instinct to protect each other. It's still part of our brain. And we have this feeling that the people around us belong to our group. And that tendency makes people create wars, create atrocities. So this tendency is so deeply ingrained that meditation, mixing people of different nationalities together, learning new languages, all the things we try to do to overcome it, it's a never-ending effort. We ourselves have to try always to overcome it, even if we've meditated for thousands of years. When we're in a group of people, we need to make a conscious effort to bring the people we don't know closer to us and not just rely on familiarity. The tendency in the brain is to always go toward what is familiar. So making a conscious effort to reach out and try to understand and feel compassion for all these forms that Parampurush has created is a never-ending effort. Next slide. Power of meditation on the brain. Meditation changes actual brain. Regular meditators have more activity in the prefrontal cortex. Actually, it's normal because that's what makes us human. People who drink alcohol, people who take drugs are actually destroying the prefrontal cortex temporarily. and they become less human. That means less able to make rational judgments. But they do it because they need to stop the brain sometimes. It's causing too much anxiety in their life. They're looking for an escape. And we all need that. So meditation and spiritual practices are the escape that we choose to do. It doesn't harm the body. It doesn't harm the mind. In fact, it makes the body and mind more healthy. So meditation increases the thickness of the cerebral cortex, encourages more connections between brain cells, and increases mental sharpness and mental ability. Next slide, please. The part of the brain, the part of our body, which is the Vishuddha chakra, which is located here around our throat. It has two functions: vivek, to discriminate, and vairagya, detachment. As we grow spiritually, we want more and more to understand where to put our energy in life. And we are looking for something that is not temporary. So discriminating between what is unreal or real, temporary, permanent, limited, unlimited, relative, absolute, changing and changes. We have felt deep in our meditation that our happiness depends on something deep inside that doesn't change. And everything we do is making an attempt to move in that direction. And because of that discrimination, we choose, we give importance to things that are lasting. That means we realize more and more through a process of meditation. We realize where to put our energy. And that doesn't change. I mean, what I mean by that is, it's not like one time we realize that and one time we make a change. It's an ongoing expansion of the mind. For example, I am now thinking, if I had been more careful over all these years with the knowledge I was given, if I had really consciously done all 6 lessons of my meditation perfectly every day, if I had not been distracted, if I had done my asanas regularly twice a day, if I had Kaushiki, for example. Kaushiki is a dance that is so healthy for everyone, especially for ladies, for women. If you're supposed to do at least 6 rounds minimum, if I had every day, twice a day, done at least 6 rounds, it affects not only the physical body, but it affects the koshas of the mind. It has so many benefits. So fortunately, I had so much knowledge given to me by my guru, by teachers, but I still could have done better. I could have done more. I could have helped this world more. And that's what I think about now. This knowledge is so precious, but it has no meaning if it's not put into use. So that's why it's something that I hope everyone can even become better at doing, more perfect. Next slide. the three ways that the mind can stay focused, even within your meditation and also when you're not sitting and meditating. Ideation on Brahma, that means ideation on the Supreme Consciousness. Even during the day, you can always have that thought. Then in your meditation itself, dhyan and dharana, the higher lessons in meditation, doing those, sixth lesson is very important. Sometimes since people do it at the end, they hurry through it. That's a very important lesson. And the company of elevated sadhakas. These three ways help our mind move forward and help us stay moving toward the nucleus. Next slide. And there's a picture of my guru, I'm eternally grateful for the lessons I have learned from him. And next slide, please. This is a short story that I'm not going to read in entirety. I'm just going to tell you about it. And it is called The Spade Sage. We're coming to the end of the presentation. So this is an example of a sage who wanted to find happiness deep inside. And this is what he had to give up in order to find that. Next page. So this is from the Jakarta Tales, which are really wonderful stories. I bought all of them and read them all to my two children. And I've given a collection of them to the preschool here. But they're not only for children, they're for big children like us, because every one of them is an inspiring and uplifting story. So this is a story of the spade sage, and his only possession was one spade, and his entire living came from his vegetables that he grew in his garden. Beautiful vegetables. Next slide. So one day he thought that the garden is good and the vegetables are very good, but he's still not happy. So he wants to go deeper and find the secret of happiness in his own mind. So he left his spade and garden and went into the forest. Next slide. However, when he was sitting there looking for happiness deep inside of him, he still felt restless and he wanted to go back to his old life. And so he gave up doing what he was doing and went back again. Next slide. He planted a new garden and he started growing beautiful vegetables again. But after a while, he still wasn't happy. So he said, well, I'm still looking for that happiness that never goes away. So I'm going to return to the forest and become a hermit. So he gave up his spade again. He gave up his garden. You know what happens when you give up a garden and no one tends to it? It all disappears very quickly. And he went back into the forest to become a hermit. Next slide. But even then, he'd sit there and he had it. You see his spade is right next to him. He still has his spade. And his mind went back to his garden, went back to the beautiful vegetables. And he was so content doing that. He really didn't want to go any more deeper. He wanted to stay at that place. So he went back again. Next slide. So this time when he went back, of course, he was restless. And he also wanted to go deeper inside. But this time he decided that his spade was what he needed to give up. So he went to the river, he twirled around 3 times so he wouldn't remember where the spade went into the water, and he threw it into the water. And then he just went back to the forest. Next slide. Then he felt very happy. He'd finally overcome his desire. He'd thrown away his spade once and for all. And he joyfully said, I have conquered, I have conquered. Next slide. Meanwhile, there was a king who was coming by on his elephant, and he heard the spade sage saying, I have conquered, I have conquered. Now that king had just been in a war, and he had also conquered his enemy. So he thought, oh, I have to find out who this person conquered. Next slide. Next one. So the spade sage came before the king, and the king said, Sir, you say you conquered. I myself am a conqueror. I have just won a great battle. I'm on my way home, but whom have you conquered? So the spade sage said, your victory was a great victory, but I have done something more. I have conquered my own self, my own desire, and found the secret of happiness deep inside myself. Next slide. So the king was very inspired by the spade sage, and he wanted everyone to honor him. The spade sage rose into the air and called people to follow him and learn the great truths, and they did follow. And he taught them how to conquer their desires and find the secret of happiness. And so it happened that a poor gardener named the spade sage became a wise man and a great teacher. Next slide. Now, in our meditation, our teacher has not taught us to go into the forest to find the secret of happiness. He has told us to work in the world and to serve the suffering humanity and still practice meditation and find the secret of happiness within the world, because that secret is not supposed to be a secret. It's to be shared with all of humanity, so everyone can find the secret of happiness locked inside their own heart. When you meditate, when you begin meditation, your mind is like this picture. The ego is dominant. When you meditate more, your sacrifice, your work, your caring, your compassion moves outward in a circle. Not only your small family, you start to feel your bigger family. So the mind moves like this. It goes more and more outward, from ego to family, to your nation, to your group that you identify with, to all human beings, and not only human beings, but respect for all life, plants, animals. Everything is necessary for us to live together and function together. There has to be a respect for all life, animate and inanimate. Even a rock has consciousness. It just hasn't developed a sense of mind yet. So the meditation that we're doing is moving us more and more in this direction, The unlimited expansion of intellect is the predominant quality of human beings. This is our evolution, and our mind is changing. The prefrontal cortex is going to expand, I believe, into the intuitional part of our brain. And our heart center, our emotions will identify with all life. And in that way, when decisions are made on this planet, the decisions will be for the welfare of all. That is our goal, the welfare of all, not the welfare for a particular group or a particular country, but human beings who have a mentality that thinks for the welfare of all. Namaskar.